Hello and welcome to this, my little talk on Jesus, really, because whenever I read the scriptures and read about particularly the gospel stories about Jesus, I'm always amazed by him, and that's what I really want to share today. The passage I'm going to look at is generally called the parable of the lost sheep, and by the way, a lot of these images are from this free Bible Images website. Feel free to check them out. But I'm calling it the Snide Remark and the story of the silly shepherd. And you'll see why. Whenever we look at scripture, we have to bear in mind the context. Context is always the key to understanding the scriptures. So what is the context in this passage? The context mostly is of the first century Jewish culture. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail about Jewish culture, but there is a couple of things you really need to understand to get what's happening in this story. Mostly you have to understand what is the Jewish hierarchy. The Jewish hierarchy goes like this at the time. Number one in the pecking order is God. God's the ruler of the universe. Number two would be the earthly ruler, like the king or the governor. Number three would be the rabbis. These are very intelligent, highly educated people like the scribes, the temple priests, the Pharisees, and including Jesus. Jesus is also called a rabbi in the scriptures. Under that you would have your skilled workers. So these would be quite intelligent, but not as intelligent as the rabbis. They would be people who were skillful in what they did, like carpenters and stonemasons and fishermen. So quite well respected. Not as well respected as the rabbis, who generally would stick to their own kind. Underneath that, you would have unskilled workers. These were your labourers and your animal keepers of various descriptions. Generally the jobs people would not perhaps choose to do. Under that would be the sinners. These are thieves and murderers and the like, and also you could include prostitutes in that category. But worst of all, the tax collectors. The tax collectors collected tax from the Jews and gave it to the Romans, who were oppressing them at the time. It's kind of like being paid to be bullied. Must have been very galling. So bear that in mind as we look at the story. The story starts in Luke chapter 15, verse 1, where Jesus teaches tax collectors and sinners. He also eats. He's also accused of eating with tax collectors and sinners. Now, in the Jewish and Middle Eastern generally culture, to eat with somebody is to associate yourself with them and to welcome them and to be regarded as being equal with them. So in making this complaint, it's not just a complaint, it's also a snide remark, because it's inferring, like it says in Proverbs 13:20, that those you hang around with, those you associate with, you become like those people. So they're inferring that Jesus is a sinner or a tax collector. That's quite serious. So these rabbis are making this complaint, this accusation against Jesus. How does he react? How do you react to these kind of negative comments? We've usually got one of two responses. We usually either attack, come back with our own negativity, or maybe we would withdraw, perhaps fearing that we might take things too far and make a situation worse. But how does Jesus react? He tells them a story. This is odd. Let's follow this along. The story goes like this. He tells the rabbis, which of you, if you had 100 sheep? Now let's just pause for a second here. Jesus is suggesting that, the rabbis suggested that Jesus was a sinner, pretty much down the bottom of the pile. Jesus is inferring that they are these unskilled workers, shepherds. They probably wouldn't have been too chuffed at that, but they can't say anything about it because, well, they suggested worse for Jesus. Let's carry on. In the story, the shepherd loses one of his sheep. So not only is he a shepherd, he's an incompetent shepherd. Can't even keep all his sheep there. No doubt the rabbis listening would not have been too happy with this inference. They wouldn't have been too happy with the inference that Jesus was suggesting they were a shepherd, which were the butt of jokes. Now he's inferring they're an incompetent shepherd. Okay. The story continues. Now, instead of just going, oh, well, I've lost one of my sheep, never mind. In the story, this shepherd leaves the 99 in the wilderness. Now, the wilderness is where wild animals live that would have loved to eat a few sheep. So he's leaving them alone in the wilderness to fend for themselves, which they don't really have the ability to do. That's why we have shepherds. Leaving them alone and going looking for this lost sheep. This is crazy. This is a silly thing to do. A good shepherd would not do this. Anyway, the story continues. The shepherd goes looking for the sheep. He looks here and there, and eventually he finds the sheep. Now, the logical thing to do would be to run back to the rest where he left the 99 to see how many of them were still alive. But no, in the story Jesus tells, the shepherd sticks him on his neck and carries him back home, the sheep, and throws a party, inviting all of his friends, saying, rejoice with me at the sheep that was lost and now is found. This is a really silly story. And to infer that the rabbis would be like that, they would be thinking, no way would we ever do that. But then Jesus gets to the punchline. Jesus says, in the same way, there is rejoicing in heaven over one sinner that repents than over 99 just persons. Can you see what Jesus is doing here? In this story, the silly shepherd, who the Pharisees, who the rabbis would not have likened themselves to in the least. In Jesus' story, he turns it around at the end and says, this is just like God. God's just like this silly shepherd. He rejoices even over one sinner that repents. Maybe we should be like that too. Thank you for listening.